So we are continuing through the resurrection of Lazarus, John chapter 11. Last week we went into a bit of a discursus where I was talking about interpretation of one word, and basically trying to show, well, what kind of context you can use in order to translate a text and get some of the nuance in the text beyond just the bare word of the text, because that's very helpful, especially when you're actually reading a larger work, like not just the Bible, but for any book. If you recognize the author's use of language, the particular word choice, and why they might be using those particular word choices, then you get a better sense of what's going on in the text. So you at once have to know what that word is, as well as the overarching context, even though the overarching context also depends on the individual words. Sounds complicated, it is, but this is what we do all the time, even in English. For the biblical text, though, we use a very specific context, namely the biblical context, in order to construct these things. Now, today we're going to be getting into what we didn't quite get into last time. So instead of the word, we're going to be going into the actual passage itself to try and construct that a little bit more. So we were with second sister, Mary, not Martha. Martha's the first sister who went out to Jesus. Mary's the second one. And after speaking with Martha, Martha goes to Mary to get her so that she can talk with Jesus herself. And Mary comes over and falls at Jesus' feet. So for this specific little bit, well, no, I like fuller context. So could somebody please read verses 28 to 37 in John chapter 11?
After Martha, I guess, said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but when he was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid them?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how you loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?"
All righty then. So we have Mary's reaction. So afterward, her sister, Mary gets up. Mary goes out to not the tomb, as the Jews presume, but Mary goes straight to Jesus, goes to his feet, falls at his feet. The rising and falling language being reminiscent of resurrection language. And then she says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Yeah. So what's Jesus' reaction to that?
He was moved in spirit, troubled.
Wept. So did he get all defensive?
No.
No. If somebody goes up to you and says, "Hey, if you had done this thing, this horrible consequence wouldn't have arisen," do you get a little bit defensive?
Right.
Yeah. So that's you defending yourself.
Yeah,
What-
you wonder why Jesus wept, because
Yeah.
he knew that he was going to bring Lazarus back. I mean, he knew he was going to die to
Yeah.
begin with, so you wonder Why did he weep?
Oh, I'm going to be getting into the schools of thought in a moment.
Maybe
But-
he wept just because he saw his dear friends weeping.
There we go. That's going to be my primary go-to is the sympathy aspect.
Yes.
So Jesus is not getting defensive or trying to explain his actions. Then he is not trying to do, well, his reaction isn't for himself. He's not trying to promote himself, what he has done. But he's looking to what other people are going through and sympathizing with them. So, if Jesus sees Mary moved in spirit in a way, then he would most likely be moved in spirit in the same way. Okay, so if you go to a funeral and there's lots of people crying, what would you likely do?
You would be crying too. I know I do.
Probably. You would not get defensive. You'd not be like, oh, what are you doing right there? You wouldn't necessarily just be neutral. Maybe you would try to be neutral if you're trying to hold it together, of course. But most likely you'd be crying along with everybody else.
Yeah, that's the human part of Jesus. I mean, he was human like us, right?
Mhm.
I think it's the God part of him too, though, because God loves
Yes.
us and is gonna have compassion on our feelings.
Mhm. And that's always going to be the tricky one because if we're talking about God, one of the divine attributes is impassivity. What on earth is that? That means God does not have passions, the violent emotions that we do. However, Jesus wept. Jesus also was angry at the people selling stuff at the temple. This is weird. So it's one of those interesting interaction problems where Jesus seems to be showing emotion as a human being, but the divinity in him wouldn't be showing emotion. So,
Is it emotion or more the knowledge of the pain?
yeah, and that's more what I'm thinking it is, where even for people who, I'm speaking for San Alton, even for people who have difficulty expressing themselves, so you feel something but you don't necessarily have public displays of emotion, you would be trying to emote so that other people understand what you're going through, because if you just go there with a blank face, nobody understands what you're thinking or feeling. So this could be Jesus just expressing the ideas of God in a way that is actually intelligible to the people around him. So was Jesus actually sad in his humanity? Absolutely. In his divinity, no. But how do these interact? Well, the thought of God is expressed through the emotions of Jesus, and that's probably about how the best we're going to get with that. But I don't know. Everything other?
I mean, I kind of understand the idea of God not having emotions. And yet
Yeah.
love is at least partly of an emotion. Or is it expressed through emotions?
Oh no, yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the odd things for us too, because if we're talking about the dominant form of love, because there's multiple words for love that are shown in the Greek. If we're talking about the dominant form of love, it is primarily in scripture expressed through action. So not emotion, action. However, that's not to say that emotions can't be part of it or be shown to be part of it, but it's primarily done through action. So, yeah.
So when Jesus
How do you think you feel?
so when
Like,
Jesus was,
usually for us, when we emote, we just emote. It's difficult for us to actually try to think through emotions, because emotions aren't rational thoughts exactly.
I guess it's hard for us to kind of comprehend or how to put it into words,
Yeah,
because we know and believe that God is with us.
Yeah.
That he's been through most of what we experience, that
Mm.
there is a compassion there. I think it immediately goes to emotion. So like, what words do you use to describe that?
yeah. And that's also a good point. Like, what words do you use to describe what's underneath? And where words fail, emotions can actually be extremely helpful. So I think this is probably why Jesus would, like, the first reaction he has to what Mary says is the emotion, is the weeping. He doesn't try to say something, he just weeps, and then that seems to communicate to her what she needs to hear. More so than if he had just given a logical response, as he did to say Martha. Where Martha, she was asking, I'll go up to Martha a little bit. So Martha, her statement's longer. So she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So she kind of leads into just a thought experiment, if you will. And then Jesus, leaning into that, then he responds in a rational way, your brother will rise again. So
Is anger an emotion?
yes.
Because God has been angry different times in the Bible.
I know, and then you go, well, this is kind of metaphorical language. And in some ways, it's easier to see the metaphor in the Hebrew because it's for the angry aspect of things. Usually there's a turn of phrase that's in the Hebrew. So you know it's a turn of phrase. Basically, it's God was short of nose, if you will. When he's patient with you, he's long of nose. And then people make a whole bunch of Jewish jokes. No. So if you're patient with somebody, you're a lot of nose. If you're angry with somebody, short of nose, or you have a burning stench in your nostrils. Sometimes that makes it through translation. I think you might have heard burning stench in the nostrils of so and so.
Yeah.
But long and short of nose does not translate well.
But isn't even patience maybe a control of emotions? And in that sense, kind of an emotion as well?
With God, I would say no, insofar as it seems to be more of an approximation of his actions that we're describing. Even the Jewish rabbis who are commenting on all the expressions and stuff, they would also be saying that no, God is dispassionate. He's not showing emotion here, but this is equivocating it to the human conception of what would be going on. So if we consider the wrath of God, the heat of the fire, if you will, of God's anger, then that would be an approximation of his judgment. But his judgment is itself completely logical. You sin, you get punished.
Mhm.
So if you're anger God, then you would receive punishment. So it's expressed through action more so than emotion. Emotions are used to describe things, of course, but usually it's the action. But I also want to explain the long and short of nose. Okay.
Maybe it was a fire breathing dragon.
Oh, okay, so long and short of nose. So the idea is, if you're long of nose, it takes longer for your eyes to go past your nose in order to see somebody to be angry with them. Whereas you're short of nose, they're right there in front of your face and you're getting at them right away. So that's the long and short of nose thing, but that's the expression that Jews have for anger. Anger and patience.
My goodness.
But yeah, for anger, it's mostly about the nose for some reason. It's part of the culture of the language, I guess.
We also read somewhere that God is a jealous God.
Hmm.
That's an emotion.
So I am jealous. I want to get the exact wording. So Exodus 20. So Exodus 20 verse 4. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children and for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So again, jealousy being related specifically to action. Because if you're jealous of somebody, what do you want?
What they have, usually.
There you go. As I heard a practical example being given by a deaconess like years and years and years ago, and I thought it was very interesting, where she was saying that if she sees her husband talk to another woman, like she knows nothing's going on, of course, but her husband is talking to another woman, and then she starts getting jealous. And it's not because of anything that her husband would necessarily be doing, but she would want her husband's attention on her. So what she's saying is, for jealousy, it is, well, are you directing your attention properly? Do I have to reorient you around so that you know what's going on? Because if her husband, and I wouldn't say that he would, but if her husband is giving undue attention to the other woman, I don't know, maybe he's salivating or something, then she'd have to kind of smack him and move his face back to her so that he's properly oriented. So that's more or less what's going on also in this text, where if somebody is giving undue attention to something away from God, that is by definition sin. So you're orienting yourself away from God toward worldly objects. So you're not walking in the path of the Lord, you're going somewhere else. Then God is a jealous God, punishing that sin, that reorientation. Whereas those who follow him, then he will reward those and love those who keep his commandments. So we tend to view it more in an emotional sense, because emotions are very useful for us to interpret these things, but it's also very much action oriented. So what actions are you performing that would be described as jealousy or love or anger or patience? And it's a weird thing for us to do, because well, especially in the past 20 years or so, where there's an increased emphasis on emotions, even to the detriment of straightforward logic.
I'm sorry, to the death of the what?
Straightforward logic. This is where you get the people who go like, I don't care about these facts or logic, I just want my opinion to be heard. My opinion is truth. Like, it's my truth. But your truth disagrees with all known facts. If it's my truth, it has to be, I feel. Yeah, sorry. But that's my social commentary in the past about 15 years as it's slowly been getting worse and worse.
Okay, this is gonna be a bit of a tangent.
Or like we're not on one already.
But the second part of what you read about loving.
Showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments.
So I think of my parents and grandparents, and they certainly love the Lord. And I look forward to today's society. They're not. So how does that?
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of in Lutheran phraseology, the close of the commandments. Now, this is actually just the summary to the first commandment. So the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. The explanation of the commandment also leads into don't make false idols, which is what I also read. And then we kind of have a summary statement of God saying, well, confirming that this is the primary commandment. So, jealous God, punishing the children of those who hate me, loving those who love me. And we're going to third and fourth generations of those who hate being punished, whereas 1,000 generations, God is being lenient. Okay, so practical example. About when did God give the 10 commandments to Moses? So this event going on right here. About when did God give this to Moses?
Mount Sinai?
Yeah, that's a where, and I'm looking for a when.
I'm sorry, I don't know that answer.
You know,
We used to have a chart on that wall
maybe that's where it'll.
where starting with Adam and then right up to,
Yeah.
that was very handy.
Yeah, it's now being used as a sunblock.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah, Living Hope Church has been using this as some block for the street. So it's
It's one of the period of idolatry, right?
Hmm.
So.
it is about the middle of the 15th century BC. So the Exodus is sometimes dated to circa 1446 BC, around there. Okay. Another when question: when did God allow the conquest of the Holy Land, the Promised Land, which those Israelites who left and came in and settled? When did God allow the, or when did God kick them out? Like be conquered by the Babylonians.
40 years later.
40
No,
years.
Yeah,
They
but
didn't, they didn't even enter into the Promised Land 40 years later. When were they kicked out of the Promised Land by the Babylonians? When were they conquered?
then, oh,
Linda's looking at the chart.
there, I've got a thing.
Close. 487/6. So we know the month in the Hebrew calendar, but we're not quite sure how that correlates to the Julian calendar, which we use. So it's 487, 486. So if you do some quick math in your head, 1446 minus 587, that's going to be under 900 years, a little under 900 years. So how patient was God with his people who kept sinning? Yeah, pretty patient. There are people in open rebellion, like there's notes all over the Old Testament of people keeping false idols around there. If you scan through 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, there's so many notes about this king was worse than his father. He didn't get rid of the high places. He had Asherah poles. He had blah, 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 blah. And that's almost every single king of the north and the south. All of them. But God didn't kick them out of the land for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's him being long of nose, him being patient. So that's more where you get into the loving for 1,000 generations, where God is patient with the people. Now he will be visiting punishments again and again, but he's also trying to be lenient to the people by not going, oh, you sin, boom, you're dead. He's allowing you to live for the sake of the love that he's shown to your forefathers in the faith, so that hopefully you one day might repent. But at a certain point in time, the sins of the people will be a stench in the nostrils of the Lord, and he will be short of nose and visit his punishment upon him.
There goes Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh yeah, oh sure, yeah.
So pastor, does God have a nose?
Jesus does.
Yeah, right.
Made in whose image?
Yeah. Jesus has a physical nose. The other three, well, even Jesus as the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, does not. But since Jesus, his divinity is joined to the humanity, Jesus has a nose. So in a very real way, yes, God has a nose.
Well,
But if we're saying before the incarnation, no.
but pastor, there's so many references in the Bible that talk about God having a strong arm or, you know,
Yeah. See,
yeah.
that's along with the emotions. This is a particular group of metaphorical speech called anthropomorphism.
Mhm.
Anthropomorphism means being in the form of man.
Mhm.
So basically what the metaphor is, let's say, I felt the eyes of the sun upon me, something like that. Or that squirrel was being a jerk. Well, the squirrel doesn't really care about emotions. And you could go with this chair is really being rude standing in my way, or do something really, really offhand like that. Now, the chair, the sun, and the squirrel, they're not human beings, but we ascribe to them human properties so that we can describe them in poetic speech. And that's more or less what's going on in the Old Testament, where we're talking about strong arm or long nose. So we're not saying that God has a body. We're not being Mormons. We're just describing how things would be in just poetical speech, terms of phrase. Anyways, and anyways, so the other half of that, so 1,000 generations, God is patient, but showing punishment to the third and fourth generation. Well, those are the generations that are living, who would have an immediate effect given to them from the sin of the forefathers. So the common example that I have is a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. So the child has done nothing to receive that, like they haven't even been born yet, where they're getting exposed to alcohol. That is the sin of the mother against the child. But the child is suffering for it, independent of its own actions. So the effects of sin tend to live on to the third and fourth generations, the living generations, that would be immediately affected. So that's the category I'm using there. I'm using another
Which
one.
started with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the effects of their sin has,
well, insofar as Cain and Abel had to till the earth so that they may eat, yes. Insofar as original sin something different. But they also suffered that. That's why Cain killed people.
What?
But the effect of the sin of where God punished Adam and Eve by taking them out of the Garden of Eden, and by the sweat of his brow, Adam had to grow food. That would be what Abel was doing. Sorry, no, Cain was doing as one of the first farmers. I guess Abel had to manage animals. Just to be clear, that's the category I'm talking about. It's not the original sin propagated down, but the effects of sin in the world that are being visited upon.
Okay.
All right. So does God have emotions? Not exactly. He is impassive. We're using metaphorical speech. Metaphorical speech is everywhere in Scripture, of course. But God's thoughts are above our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. So we know that how we speak of God is more of an approximation rather than straightforward. This is how it is. So if we're looking at God being angry, then what is he actually doing for us to perceive him as being angry? If God is jealous for his people, how is he acting out of jealousy? And if Jesus is weeping, well, then that gets into the whole other thing, because Jesus' humanity is also there, and it's actually publicly displaying emotion. The divinity in Jesus would not be emoting, as it were, but the thought of the divinity as expressed through the humanity would manifest itself as Jesus actually weeping and actually caring about the people whom he loves and recognizing their pain.
I think that explains it.
So, yeah, isn't theology great? We have to make all these great categories in order to try and understand even the simple stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I would say that Jesus weeping is him trying to show sympathy. So Martha, when she tries to speak with Jesus, she's trying to fix something. She's like, well, I know that you can ask the Father and he'll give you something, he'll work something out for you. And Jesus then says, yeah, Lazarus will rise again. So he responds very logically, and then Martha goes like, well, yeah, sure, and on the last day, and then Jesus has to correct her again logically. But with Mary, she doesn't have that logical tailing, like, I know that you can do something in order to fix the situation. She just goes, why weren't you here? My brother wouldn't have died. And then the only good way to respond to that would be to show emotion, because that's what Mary's giving him.
Pastor, I didn't really think about this, but reading that, we don't know the tone of voice she used, but if she was already weeping, she probably was weeping when she asked that question or made that statement. Lord, if you'd been here, she probably did that with tears pouring out of her eyes.
She could have. Again, yeah, as you said, we don't know. What we can say for sure is that people in her house had to comfort her. So we know that she was definitely in a state of mourning. And when she left, they also assumed that she would be going to the tomb to mourn. So the idea was that, yeah, she's definitely in mourning. Whether or not her eyes were full of tears, we don't exactly know. Hard to say. When we see her in heaven, we can ask. But
they said she was weeping. When you're weeping, you've got tears running down your cheeks.
No, that's Jesus weeping.
No, Jesus saw her weeping. When Jesus, in 33, when Jesus saw her.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, yes. So I'm thinking that when she said this to him, she probably was choking and weeping. Lord, if you'd been here, almost accusing. Right?
And yeah, as you said, like, yeah, it's hard to say tone of voice if it's the actual accusation. Like, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, or if it's just kind of just mourning the fact, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Hard to say. But yeah, yes, definitely mourning. Definitely mourning. So Jesus' reaction, going a little bit more into that. So deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Yeah, this is giving me some issue with translation. So Weinrich in this commentary is saying that Jesus is angry. And I'm going, huh? And apparently that is a root meaning of the word terrasso, the verb there, deeply moved. However, it's in a particular voice and in a particular context where I wouldn't necessarily think that he was just angry in general, but this is something far more nuanced. Because Greek has this fun thing that we don't have in English. We have an active voice. I did something. You also have passive voice. Something, sorry, I have to do this in passive. I had something happen to me. Greek also has a middle voice, which we do not have in English. So it's very hard trying to explain it, but it's reflexive. So it'd be something along the lines of, I did something to myself. So in the middle voice, which is somewhat reflexive and Jesus was deeply moved. Reinhardt will say that Jesus stirred himself up in the spirit, but I don't think that's quite right. It seems that you would translate that in somewhat more of a passive way, somewhat what the NIV does. So he was deeply moved in spirit, but this was going on internally. And yeah, it's so hard trying to think of how to translate this as well as how to think through it. But it seems to be a state of anxiety, if you will.
My Bible says troubled
Yeah.
instead of angry. I think.
Yeah. So NIV doesn't.
Talking about verse 33.
Yeah. So NIV doesn't have angered either. So Weinberg speaking against the more popular translations. What he's doing, trying because he's focusing on the base dictionary definition of the word. I want to focus more on context. It seems to be that Jesus was more anxious, more in anxiety and agitation with respect to the situation. So somebody is weeping in front of him. He knows that she's going through extreme amount of pain. This is also causing him to reflect on Lazarus, who went through the experience of death, which is not pleasant. So it seems to be that Jesus is against death itself as it is. Okay. Now we're going into the three main categories of interpretation of the text. Yay. So.
Pastor,
Yep.
I was thinking about this, and Jesus knew he purposefully didn't come in enough time to, keep him from dying. He purposefully waited. He knew what he was going to do, but still, when he got there, he was really sad for them because he knew how they were suffering. Right? So he was being very empathetic.
Yes.
And even though he knew what he could do to help, he was just sorry that he had to put them through this. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was sorry that they had to experience this because it's so sad.
Well, yes, he's sorrowful for the experience of death that we go through based on our sin, but it wasn't, he was sorrowful because he had to put them through this. Because if we were to say that, then we're now saying that God, the one who commands life and death, is deliberately putting us through hardship when he knows that he doesn't need to, and then being troubled by his own actions.
Well, I didn't mean it quite like that.
Yeah. So we have to word things carefully.
Yes, of course. No, I didn't mean that. I'm just meaning that he was sad because they were so sad.
Yeah.
And he knew he could help them, but at the moment he was just sad with them.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going into the three broad categories of interpretation. So the first one coming up for Jesus feeling emotion is the flesh is weak. So it falls into agitation within Christ. So he's deeply moved in spirit, using the nice middle voice there. So he moved himself in spirit to keep it in check. So he's rebuking his own emotions. Personally, I think this is silly. However, there were, I believe it was a couple of church fathers who thought that way, but no, I think that's kind of silly that Jesus was trying to keep his own emotions in check. Like, he does not make sense to me. Anyways.
Well, my commentary has reference to the fact that he wept, or that he was annoyed that they didn't have faith.
Oh, that's the second broad category here.
Would you say that again? I didn't hear what you said.
So
the mourners wept as though without hope.
Yeah, so the second category is Jesus is stirred in agitation and anger because everybody around him is lacking in the faith that Jesus will perform the resurrection action. I also think this is kind of silly. Okay, but yeah, part of that is, are the people actually displaying a lack of faith? And I wouldn't say so. Because if we were even looking to say Martha is clueless in her faith in the sense that, I'll just scroll up to Martha. So Martha is a little bit clueless in her faith, where when Jesus says your brother will rise again, then she says, yeah, he'll rise again on the resurrection of the last day. Now Jesus isn't rebuking her, saying to her, you foolish woman, don't you know that I am the no. He's just making the statement, I am the resurrection and the life. And then he's asking her deliberately, do you believe this? And from her response, she doesn't quite understand it. He was like, yeah, you were the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. But she doesn't repeat his statement, like, I know that you are the resurrection, that you'll raise him from death right now. So she's acting in ignorance, but Jesus isn't rebuking her or anything of the sort. It's just ignorance. Like even with the disciples, even before that, where, let's see, going up to verse 11, I'll say. So Jesus tells the disciples, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake them up. And then the disciples, they of little faith go, yeah, if he sleeps, he's going to get better. Or that Jesus has to basically go, oh, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad he was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Jesus even calls out their lack of particular faith in what Jesus is about to do. But the sole purpose of this action is to give to them an actual foundation for their belief of Jesus being the resurrection of life, that he will bring life from death. So for him to be angered at the lack of belief, even though Jesus knows all along that the people don't believe, that seems to be very odd. So I disagree with the notes in their Concordia study Bible.
Mine says that too. And they're different Bibles.
I know. Well, you're using the old NIV study Bible. Nancy's using the ESV, and some of the notes from here were used as the base for the other. So I disagree. But this is nothing new, and I can disagree with this because the commentary isn't divinely inspired.
But if you said he's asleep, I mean, if you told me that somebody was asleep, I would think he was sleeping, not dying, that he wasn't dead.
That doesn't
Yeah,
sound permanent,
we
does
covered
it?
this about a month ago. So about a month ago, I was making the point that the specific wording that Jesus was using was also very much representative of just dying in general. That is a common metaphor for you to fall asleep in death. Jesus is emphasizing that particular interpretation of the word so that he can say that, yes, coming up from death is as easy as rousing from sleep. The disciples, they forego the main metaphorical use of that word because they don't believe Jesus will actually raise him from the dead. But that is the common, a very common way to use it, and it's the predominant use of that word in the New Testament. Yeah.
Do you think it's not a matter of they didn't believe it, but they just never thought of it even being possible? It never
No.
occurred to them that he might do that?
No. Jesus already rose a couple people from the dead prior in his ministry. It doesn't come up in John. In John, Lazarus is the only one Jesus raises up from the dead, but there are a couple other instances where Jesus raises people from the dead in the other Gospels. Because there's one of them is actually in a funeral procession where the mother is weeping over her only son dying in childhood, but then Jesus comes comes over and then he raises the child from death, and then you go, ah, okay, I guess we're not having a funeral anymore, and then they have to change plans. But yeah. But it's not a common occurrence. So Jesus, we only have recordings of him doing that a couple times prior to this.
So
Anyway,
basically, they were just thinking, if you'd just come sooner, he wouldn't have died.
yeah, so they want healing from sickness. Okay, so another interpretation is Jesus is rousing himself away from the fruitless action of weeping to the action of the resurrection, that he angered himself even against death, because he's instead of weeping, he's now angry at death, and he's going to go fight death.
When I read this,
And I'm like, yeah.
it just, to me, it says he was moved in spirit and trouble. That's internal, hidden.
Yeah.
He asks, where have you laid him? They say, come and see.
Yeah.
Then he wept.
Yeah.
Publicly.
Yeah.
So the people could see it.
Yeah.
Same, like it's. It
Yeah.
doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem like there needs to be deep interpretation. of
No. No, but people just keep throwing out a whole bunch of things where so Jesus is angry at people, or he's angry at death, or he's doing this. Like I think that it's more what we've been talking about is the sympathy with the other people, as well as for my personal opinion, is that he's also weeping on behalf of Lazarus, that Lazarus had to go through such an ordeal. And this is also the ordeal that we go through, where we go beyond the veil of tears in this world to await the resurrection. And it's not necessarily a pleasant experience when we pass away. And that is just because of the nature of death. Death is not natural. It is an aberration within the creation. It was never meant to be part of the creation, but it came about simply as a consequence of sin. So if we're suffering the consequence of sin in death, this isn't the happiest thing because it's a consequence of sin. So yes, I will go. Why don't we just read this as Jesus actually being stirred in spirit? So he's anxious, agitated against the situation that he's in, and he wants to correct this, and then he's weeping. So yeah, I think that people have it correct when they say, see how he loved him, see how Jesus loved Lazarus. Like this could be them just misinterpreting things, but I think that they're starting to understand that, yeah, no, Jesus is actually sympathizing with Mary, Martha, the mourners, as well as Lazarus himself. Yeah. So yeah, I'm moving away from the broad categories of interpretation that some people have had over history, because these ultimately make Jesus a very poor pastor. All these are just Jesus fighting his own personal demons, people, or not demonizing other people, but being angry against them, rather than him actually doing actions for the good of the people, which is blatantly why he's there, as he himself said to the disciples. He's going there so that people may believe in what? That there is life even though you die. So I think that he's trying to be a good pastor by actually weeping with his flock. Okay. Yeah, Jesus. One fun little thing. So where have you laid him, he asked. This actually mirrors Mary Magdalene's statement later on in John chapter 20, when she comes to an empty tomb and she's wondering where Jesus is laid. Yeah. So this is similar to that. So Jesus is going to where Lazarus is laid and will find him, whereas Mary wonders where Jesus has been laid, but the fact is he is already risen. So Jesus, so there's a clear difference between Lazarus and Jesus, where Jesus is the one cannot end in death. He's going to end in life, whereas Lazarus is the one who remains dead without Jesus.
Pastor, I was just wondering about this resurrection and also Christ's resurrection.
Mhm.
Obviously, they did not deal with the dead the way we do now, where we dig a hole in the ground and bury people. Do they put people in caves or something when they die?
So
Tombs?
this was also kind of a matter of debate for in Weinrich, the commentary I was reading, where he was talking about whether this is a vertical or horizontal tomb. Basically, what that means is, did they dig down or did they dig sideways? We don't know for Lazarus, but there are horizontal and vertical tombs where you dig into a surface, so vertical, or horizontal, or you dig down the vertical. But basically, you're making burial chambers. So you're not necessarily just digging a space just for one corpse, but a whole bunch of corpses, because you don't want to do that every single time into the rock. But this is also why they often use a cave as a starting point, because a natural cave will save you a whole bunch of chipping away stone. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and looking at my notes. So the word to weep, to shed tears, as well as the cognate noun. So there's the verb to weep, and then there's also the weeping, the noun. Tear, have a tear. Appears only here in these couple verses, as well as in Revelation chapter 7, verse 17, and Revelation 21, verse 4. I find this interesting because those are these are the only three places they appear in the New Testament. What's going on in Revelation chapter 7, what's going on in Revelation chapter 21. Chapter 7 is talking about the Lamb who will be leading his people to a place where God will wipe away tears from their eyes. Revelation chapter 21 is the new heavens and new earth, where all the people have entered in, all the resurrected faithful have entered in, and God has wiped away every tear from their eyes.
Wasn't there weeping?
So this passage and those two are the only times this word comes up in the New Testament.
What
So
about
the idea is that those tears that are being wept over death itself will be wiped away in the world to come. So right now there is mourning, and Jesus is reflecting this in his mourning. But there will be a time when Jesus, the Lamb, will lead us out of this into the resurrection, into the new heavens, new earth, where all the tears will be wept away. All the tears shed over death will be wept away, swept away.
Isn't this word also used at Christ's crucifixion? Weren't people weeping there? Wasn't that recorded?
Not this particular word in Greek, no.
Oh, a different word?
I'd have to look at what words are being said there, but I can't think of any in particular. But this is a very particular word that John uses.
Oh,
My notes make a distinction between the weeping in verse 33 as being loud and wailing, whereas the wept is more just shed tears.
Yeah, so that's the difference between the different words being said.
okay.
Verse 33. Wait, usan. Wait, okay. I can't tell you for sure the lexical form of the word, but I think it's ple'ao is the word being used to weep, whereas in verse 33, whereas in 35 it is that cruel. more literally to shed tears. So the noun form of that verb is just tear, and that's what's appearing in Revelation. But actually, now that I think about it, yeah, that's sharing similarities to a root, which is to cry out. Yeah. So it would be kind of a loud form of weeping. Yeah. Okay.
So they have,
I prepared my notes. I think I wrote these like 4 weeks ago. 3-4 weeks ago.
so it's like the word for love in Greek. There's many words for love. Agape just being one of them. There must be more than one word for weeping.
Mhm. Oh, we use multiple words too. There's weeping, there's mourning, there's crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sobbing.
Sure.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and then we go to the statement of the Jews, see how we loved him. So this love here is phileo. See how he befriended him, if you will. It's the same one used by the messenger going way back. So the guy who came, verse 3, to Jesus, who's saying, Lord, the one you love is sick. It's the same word there. Jesus also basically uses the word where he says, our friend Lazarus. So that's the same root. But there's also the deep love that Jesus has mentioned in verse 5, the agape, where Jesus is actually going to lay down his life for Lazarus. So if we're looking at the love, yeah, Lazarus is the friend, but Jesus is going to lay down his life for his friend. Where does that come up? That sounds familiar. Oh, what? Well, this is going to be coming up later on in chapter 15, where Jesus is using the two forms of love there. He says, being in verse 9 in chapter 15, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Agape. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's command and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love, agape, has no one than this: to lay down one's life for one's friends. Philos. So philos is the friendly love, if you will, but agape is the love that lays itself down. You can't necessarily go too sharp of a distinction between them, but that also seems to be what Jesus is, or what's being hinted at in John chapter 11, where yes, Jesus does love Lazarus, but this love is even stronger, agape love. So Jesus is going to, yes, lay down his life for Lazarus. This will, of course, come about in the form of the crucifixion, but even kind of before that time, this is going to be one of the events where, towards the end of the chapter, we're going to see this. But this is like one of the main events that the Pharisees used to decide, yeah, we have to kill Jesus. So Jesus is basically signing his death sentence by going to Lazarus and raising him from the dead. Yep.
I guess that would contribute to the troubled aspect because he would know that.
You could say that, yeah.
That's very possible, Linda. That he's what, 1 week away from being crucified?
More than that.
Or
We don't know exactly when,
but it's soon.
yeah. Yeah, and then some people comment, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So this is the second time this is mentioned. It was mentioned before with the feast of dedication, that is Hanukkah. sorry, no, not Hanukkah. The Good Shepherd discourse, which was before Hanukkah, which was sometime after the Feast of Tabernacles. So a few months ago, at least. Which suggests that this crowd here witnessed the blind man actually seeing, so they were quite possibly hanging around. The blind man himself was most likely on the way out of Jerusalem, so he could have even been known to the people there. Bethany is a very short distance away from Jerusalem, which means that some of the people here also possibly had listened to the Good Shepherd discourse. So, interesting. Also, this could be hinting that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus could have been converted at that discourse. Who knows? Who knows? But the basic idea is they recognize the miracle done for the blind man, so they know that Jesus is somebody whom they should revere. So they're kind of on the fence of being sheep, where they're like, yeah, we heard Jesus' voice. We know that he rose somebody. He opened the eyes of the blind, but we need more proof. We need something for us to believe in. Because for Martha, when she was saying, Lord, I believe whatever you ask God, it will be given to you. She is not necessarily thinking about life and death, because she's still thinking of the resurrection way off at the end. But she is thinking about physical healing. So physical healing, as opposed to raising from death, those are for them in completely different categories. If Jesus can do one, that doesn't mean that he can do the other. Actually, case in point. We're talking pre-Jesus, so Old Testament. How many people were resurrected in the Old Testament?
Hold
A
that.
f- a few.
If we're counting that as a real historical event, not a vision, I'm more of the opinion it's a real historical event, not a vision. A lot of scholars are thinking it's more a vision.
What event did you say to that?
I said a whole valley full.
Oh.
Yeah, Ezekiel
Dry bones?
in the Valley of Dry Bones. But if we're not counting that one, how many?
Jonah, if he was dead, I don't know. He didn't die. I guess.
He didn't die. Well, he died, but he wasn't raised.
Elijah, Elisha?
Yes, Elisha with the child of the widow of
Zarephath?
No, that was me. No, Zarephath was Elijah, wasn't it?
I'm trying to remember now. I always forget. Anyways, a widow's son was raised by Elisha.
Yes.
That's about it.
But Elijah raised somebody's kid, and then Elisha raised somebody else's kid from the dead.
Not exactly. No. Because what Elijah did was he went to a widow, and she was gathering enough food for herself and her son to have one more meal and then die. And then Elijah works the miracle of that food lasting for as long as they needed. So they actually didn't die. Elisha was the one who raised a widow's son. So Elisha gave a prophecy that she wasn't a widow at the time. But Elisha gave a prophecy that this woman would conceive a child with her husband. And then later on, the child died. And when Elisha returned, then she kind of rebuked him, like, why did you give me a son if he's just going to die in infancy? And then Elisha had to raise the son. That is the only very concrete resurrection that's really described in the Old Testament. We do have Ezekiel, and again, there's some discussion whether or not that's a vision or an actual straightforward happening in real life. Again, I'm more of the opinion it's happened in real life. But other than that, there's not really a resurrection. It just doesn't, yeah. So this is very few and far between.
And yet they believed in the resurrection because when it came to Isaac, Abraham was willing to follow God's, command to kill him because he believed that he could raise him from the dead.
Yes,
So they believed in it.
yes. But my point is that they have very few case studies to say, yeah, this is going to happen.
That's true.
But the people here also believe in the resurrection of the dead, as said by Martha. So they're looking forward to the general resurrection of the dead, as was prophesied in Daniel chapter 12. But
Yeah.
Again, that's going way off. They're not thinking right now. Okay. So we actually get to move on a little bit. Let's see how far we get. Okay. So Jesus, once more deeply moved. Again, that word there, where he's agitated in spirit once more. So he came to the tomb. This is, oh, actually, I kind of like the word for tomb. It is, what's it in Greek again? Oh, I'm sorry. Pronouncing this is very difficult for English because you have to pronounce the M sound and the N sound together. May on. Oh. Basically, it means a place of remembrance. I like that word, but I hate pronouncing it, but I like the word. So Jesus came to the place of remembrance, the tomb where Lazarus was, where people could remember him, having lived there. And yeah, I mentioned debate whether it's the horizontal one where they dug into a rock surface, or if it's vertical where they dug down. Don't know. It says that it was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Does it mean laid across as laid across, so meaning the vertical one, or laid across where you push it in front of the wall? Don't know. But came to the tomb. Came to the tomb. Oh, right. I'll also mention stone. The word for stone there. So a stone laid across it also does not come up often in the gospel. Basically, it comes up only here with Lazarus, with the stone across the tomb, and the stone laid across Jesus' tomb.
Right.
So John is being very particular about his language, connecting Lazarus' resurrection with Jesus' resurrection. So a lot of wording, a lot of praising, connecting those two.
Is this a foreshadowing of Jesus?
Yeah, that's kind of the point. It's like this is showcasing you what Jesus will do more miraculously in his own resurrection.
Was putting stones over the entrances of the tombs, the caves, was that standard practice? Or,
Keeps animals out.
so is the word specific to like what we would call a tombstone? No?
No, that would be more the word for the tomb. That's very particular to that type of concept. Tombstone, no, it'd just be if I can get back.
So like is the word for stone different than like when they were stoning people and stuff? Like is it a totally different?
Yeah, that's a totally different word. Yeah, 'cause this is using lithos. Whereas I'd have to look up the stoning first.
Well, no, it's okay.
Because there's if I remember correctly, so there's lithos, which is kind of stone, and then there's also petros, which is a stone, a different type of stone, a smaller stone.
Okay.
Lithos is kind of, if you will, the substance. So the rockiness versus Petros, which is more an actual stone. So the this rock. So rockness versus this rock, if you will.
And that would be, and then they say stone as in singular, so there was one solid piece of stone.
Yep.
Like you could put it in a
It'd be
sling.
pretty silly to have
Right.
one do one. Anyways, says take away the stone. But Lord, by this time it will stinketh. Which is the KJV one. I know, like there was a pastor that I listened to, like he very much preferred the KJV because then because you like the word stinketh. But yes, it would be a bad order. Let's see. Oh. Oh. Interest. Okay, yeah. So looking at my notes. So he says, by this time there's a bad odor for his bit. So because he's been there for 4 days. The particular verb tense for at this time is a perfect verb tense perfect participle in Greek, which basically means that the action has completely worked itself out. So she's saying he is definitely dead.
Rotting.
Well, he's definitely dead because he's rotting. But yeah, he's dead. She thinks he's dead. He's not coming back.
Decomposing.
Yeah. In this area of the world, you also use spices to try and lessen the
Odor.
stench.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's only so much spices can do.
Yeah.
For Jesus, when he dies, and there's lots of mention of spices being brought to the tomb so they can work it into the body, but that doesn't.
So Lazarus was in the grave for 1 day longer than Jesus was.
Yeah. So for them, they might not have thought that there would be a ton of decay just yet. For Jesus, so there's still enough time to try and lessen the impact of the decay for the working of the spices into the flesh. But we're talking about, if you will, meat being left out in a very warm climate. It's out of the sun at least because it's in a cave, but meat left out in a very warm climate. It's not gonna. It's for a few days. It's not gonna go well. Yeah. So, and here also Martha by her statement. So she goes, like, he's definitely dead. He's dead enough that it's stinking.
Could they smell it? Does that mean they smell bad odor?
No, they don't smell it outside of the tomb.
No, but when they remove the stone, does it say anything about him smelling?
No, doesn't say anything. But so when Martha is saying this, she is also just kind of displaying her lack of understanding. She's saying that he is the resurrection and the life. So she's still very much convinced that her brother is going to be dead once they roll away the stone. Kind of sad, but yeah. Again, there have only been a few resurrections thus far in history to the knowledge of all Jews. So that in Martha's defense. Okay. I'm going to the wrong page. Okay, so the 4 days above, as I had mentioned before, could refer to a later, so coming up a century and a half later, a rabbinical tradition where souls reside around their bodies for 3 days. But again, I look at this more as a link to John's numerology as it appears in Revelation. I think that's a little bit more biblical rather than rabbinical. So I think that this is more representing Lazarus as a figure from the earth. So number 4, representative of the earth. Or if we're going with a different number from Revelation. Weiner pointed out in his commentary that there were 2 witnesses in Revelation chapter 7, and they were dead for 3.5 days before being raised and called to heaven before the end of the world. I'm not quite inclined for that one, because again, numbers in Revelation very symbolic. The 3.5 days is a half time, so they're actually waiting in the heavens for resurrection. Anyway, for anybody curious. So I'm still thinking this is more Lazarus representing somebody from the earth who's being raised. So Jesus will raise everybody from the earth. So then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Okay. Glory of God. Big
So
major.
he's saying, if you believe. So in other words, you don't believe yet. Or I recognize that you're not believing yet.
Yeah. But specifically, they're not believing in the glory of God because they don't see it.
Mhm.
So the glory of God, which is the dominant concept here, is linked primarily to Jesus' death and then also his resurrection. But in the Gospel of John, it's primarily linked to the death of Christ because that is what starts everything else. This is going to be a concept that I'll draw out when we eventually get to the whole death of Jesus. By the time we get to chapter 18.
You mean next year?
2 years from now. A couple of years from now.
I might not be around.
Or you know, to go before I finish the study. I'll drag this out 10 more years if I have to keep you.
That's gonna sound like you'll be here too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Who knows? Or then, yeah, one day you're like, quick, I'm getting the call. I have to do another 10 chapters in one study. Let's do this.
Right.
Just fly through the verses. The glory of God. Jesus, in his final speech to the disciples at the Last Supper, this is John chapter 17, is asking the Father to glorify him with the glory that they had before the creation of the world. What glory did they have before the creation of the world? Well, the glory that brought all life into the world. So the glory of God is life itself. So when Jesus is asking in chapter 17 for life, he is praying for the glory made manifest at the cross. So okay, this is very complicated. Okay. Sorry. I will use a board for visual representation. We have Last Supper, where you also have the blood, which is the New Testament, or if you will, last real New Testament. So Jesus is saying at the Last Supper he's already in death, basically. Then we're at Gethsemane. I did not spell that perfect. There we go. Okay. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I did this last week too, where I left a letter out of hermeneutics. Yes, okay. So this is where Jesus dies. When arrested, as well as where he's sweating blood. Then he's sentenced to death multiple times.
Why do you say he dies at Gethsemane?
Because he's actually contemplating his own death, and you have an action there with the arrest that, yes, there is no escape now. You are absolutely on the trail to this. Of course, it really got started with Jesus offering the blood of the last will and testament, where he's saying, like, yes, at this time I am in death.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to show is that this is a death that takes a period of about a day. Because he gets all the sentencing to death, so he's at 4 different trials. You got Caiaphas, not first Annas, then Caiaphas, then Pilate, then Herod, and then you can go back to Pilate again, but I'll go to 4. Then you have the actual crucifixion. And then Jesus cries out, "It is finished," where he's basically saying everything related to his death is finished. And if everything related to his death is finished, that also means that the including rest in the tomb, as well as the resurrection, are finished as well. So they haven't yet happened in time, but they're all part of the same action. So this is the entire glory of God, where you have the death and the resurrection, because it's also in the crucifixion where Jesus actually brings us to life. So life in blood. The blood that was shed there was actually also drunk there. Yep. So this is why it's complicated, because it's extended through time, but it's all seen through the eyes of the gospel writers as a singular action, as it were. Like John has his own particular nuances to it. Matthew, Luke, and Mark tend to try to focus on different historical events. John has his own thematic events that he really likes to do, but all 4 gospel writers are kind of presenting this as the same thing. This is all one thing. John does this somewhat thematically through the speeches, as well as the speeches conducting themselves. The gospel writers, the other gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're the ones who actually depict Jesus giving the last will and testament of his blood, and then all this stuff happens for his death. But yeah, it's all the same action.
Why are you only using blood instead of the body and the blood?
Because it's a lot easier to do. When Jesus sheds his blood, when Jesus gives the blood, this is when he says, this is the New Testament in my blood, not my body and my blood, but in my blood for the
Remission.
I'm trying to remember Luke's words specifically, but they're not coming to me. But in the words of institution that we use, which uses all 4 occurrences of the words kind of put together, it's this is New Testament in my blood shed for you for forgiveness of sin. So the words associated with the testament is focusing primarily on the blood, but the body of Christ is also the thing that we share in, and that's going to be more St. Paul's emphasis in 1 Corinthians chapters 10 and 11, where he's emphasizing that we have to be in the same body as the church, but also the same body as Christ. So you have to recognize the body of the church as well as the body of Christ specifically. So for him, for Paul, it's about unity in body, and that's more what the body represents as the unity. And then the blood is looked more upon as sacrificial forgiveness. You do receive that in the body, of course, because it's the one action of the Lord's Supper, but there's different emphases that you can put to each one. So when we talk about the crucifixion, I can also say that, yeah, Jesus Christ also offered up his body to God on the cross. his body was lifted up between heaven and earth, so God would see to his body and see this offering of blood shed by this body for the forgiveness of sins.
So the way you have the arrows going,
I'm
if
just
you
going with
continue going to our altar when we also receive his body and blood.
Yeah, basically. Well, if we're going with this being all one action, what we're actually receiving in our supper is not just parts of this, but the entire thing. Because that's what Jesus meant for this singular action to be, is that it goes to all of it. So when we look to our supper being the continuation of the supper that Jesus had, we're receiving all of it. So every once in a while, I say that, I mentioned a number of sermons, that the same blood that we receive at the Last Supper is the blood that was shed here at the crucifixion. The same body that we receive here is the same body that was offered up to God on the cross. Because it's putting you in direct contact with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And if it's in contact with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, not only do we receive the forgiveness of sins, which was the primary action of crucifixion, but since this is all one action, you're also receiving the resurrection in that meal. That's the whole thing.
We have the Lord's Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane, and we're over there.
Okay, so so next to the Church of All Nations.
If that's where the.
Well, it depends. Because Gethsemane is the whole hill.
Well, yeah, and where we're at.
But there is like next to the Church of All Nations, there's a particular garden where
Yeah,
people go like, that's where it happened. And
No.
like,
No, they told us this is where it happened,
yeah, they do that.
and it was the cave there in the side of in a sort of a mountain, not a big mountain, but a mountain. And the cave was, they didn't say that was where Jesus was, but they said that was like what he would have been in. But we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then they gave us, Robert Mons was our pastor with us
Oh,
at the time.
Wow.
interesting.
Actually, we were split because there was the Central Baptist Church with their pastor Kennedy and us with our pastor. We were all on the same tour,
Okay.
but we each had a little individual cup made out of the wood from the olive tree. And yeah, communion.
Okay. Well, that's nice to
Yeah, wow.
but to summarize, this is the glory of God. All this stuff. John tends to emphasize the crucifixion a little bit more. If you go through the other gospel accounts, they also emphasize the crucifixion a bit more than the resurrection. But John kind of gives us a hint as to why he might do that. And he does that with Jesus' word, totality, it is finished. So when Jesus says it is finished at the cross, then gives up the Spirit. He's saying that, yeah, not only is all that stuff finished, but all this stuff is finished. So our resurrection it's also accomplished because it's an extenuation of Christ's resurrection. So yeah, Lazarus was raised because Jesus is raised in a few weeks. Because what's time to an eternal God? Man? Why would things need to move forward? it is one of the weird things. So yeah, the disciples, even though they're receiving the body and blood of Jesus before he's actually offering up his body and blood at the cross, receive the same forgiveness of the body and blood on the cross, even though that won't happen for 15 hours or give or take. Very confident.
If I remember correctly, it wasn't beside the church, but we did go to see that church.
I would
I think
imagine,
I've got
yeah,
pictures.
yeah, most people do.
But no, this was just a garden
Okay.
and it was, the cave was, inside the mountainside.
Okay.
Did you take pictures?
I did take, I think I've got pictures.
I'll
Oh,
close the Bible study now and then we can talk about this after our
Okay.
How about that? Let us pray. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for sending Jesus Christ, your dear Son, to us to be our heavenly pastor. We thank you, O Lord, that we do not have somebody who does not sympathize with us, but somebody who does see us when we go through all the emotions related to sin and death and every other consequence of evil in this world. We thank you for his sympathy, and we ask you that he give to us compassion through the word and the sacraments, that we may receive the glory of God, the glory of you, O Lord, and be raised from not only death, but be raised from all evils that afflict us in the here and now. All this we ask for and praise you for in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.